This is episode 602 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Dringmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, it was a eventful week, just kind of here in late April 2024. Lots to talk about, lots going on. But the first thing I want to talk about out of the chute was a surreptitiously recorded conversation between our esteemed governor, Lujan Grisham, and I believe it was Mayorkas's chief of staff with the Homeland Security Department. It's a little hard to exactly grasp who she's having a conversation with, but because partially the conversation is just one-sided. It's the governor, and what we hear from her is complaints from the governor to the Biden administration, talking about the lack of agents on the border, people fleeing or climbing over the border, or coming through border areas around New Mexico. Then you hear about fentanyl briefly, but what the governor really is upset about seems to be two things, which I think are useful windows into the governor's brain. One is cannabis and the producers thereof, who I guess are having shipments of cannabis, and this was kind of reported right before this audio was leaked on social media, on Twitter. So that was one thing, is that she's really upset about the seizures of marijuana. And then the other was she told Secretary Mayorkas's guy, I'm cranky. She's holding off the press, holding them at bay, and that she doesn't want to write a nasty letter to the Biden administration, on various issues, including the cannabis seizures. So interesting stuff. It's a video that unfortunately we're not going to be able to play here, but it's worth going online and finding it, because it's been reported now in the New Mexico media outlets. But it's I think some pretty telling audio footage.
Yeah, and she said she didn't want to appear feckless, was one of the lines that caught me,
Yes.
which was like, it was like, as opposed to just actually being feckless on the issue, was that the distinction? But this is interesting, and the thing I want to know is who recorded that and how did they do that?
Oh,
I sort of suspect it was she was traveling somewhere and just didn't realize that there was always people with their cell phones around that can record what you say. But it may have been worse than that, because, as you say, it's just one side of the conversation. But pretty interesting and pretty telling. And the one thing I will say regarding the issue of stopping marijuana in southern New Mexico is that if you don't stop marijuana and search for it, that's going to turn into the fentanyl pipeline. Now, the issue about whether the feds do catch and release on marijuana, that is a whole nother issue, and she was kind of asking for that to to look the other way. But the other issue with marijuana, and we've already seen this in New Mexico's program, is you can't always tell legal from, quote, illegal marijuana. So there's still a lot of marijuana coming into the United States from Mexico that's not part of New Mexico's high regulation, high taxation regime. So there's a lot of issues to be faced there. But the one thing I do want to emphasize is that you never want to say, oh, we will never look at a marijuana shipment in southern New Mexico, because that will become the de facto fentanyl pipeline. So you want to keep the people moving drugs through New Mexico guessing, and it sounds like they're doing that, but not in a way that necessarily is being appreciated by Governor Lujan Grisham.
yeah, and obviously it's worth noting that marijuana remains illegal under federal law, right or wrong, good or bad. The federal government and the state government have different approaches to marijuana and its legal status. So the federal government seizing these plants and seizing marijuana shipments is acting under the laws that it has on the books. Uh, the governor specifically asked about officer discretion, et cetera, et cetera, and I'm perfectly fine with that. However, it is I do think amusing, perplexing, and frustrating that the governor picks these areas out. And as you recall, it was during a special session of the legislature she called specifically to legalize marijuana that the governor uh, took on that issue to begin with. And it just shows you that this governor gets a few priorities that she really wants. Uh, and marijuana is one of those. And it's kind of surprising and striking that she really just hangs on to those like a dog with a bone, and not some of the other what I would consider much more serious issues that could be addressed in this state.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. I do think that that is the case. And, there was a reference on that recording to, I believe, baby producers, that the people who posted it weren't sure what that meant. I think I know what that means. It means that New Mexico allows a lot of small producers. And if you're a small producer and the feds steal your pot, it's going to be tough on you financially. But the legalized industry in New Mexico is facing a lot of challenges. Everyone says so. There are probably more retail establishments in the state that can ever be sustained long term by probably a factor of 10. I happen to think that maybe 10% of them will survive. So we will see. But this whole marijuana transition, if you will, the Marijuana Transition Act is not necessarily always smooth sailing. And boy, I certainly, again, do hope that it doesn't support the importation of a lot worse things than marijuana, particularly the huge fentanyl crisis that is facing our country and absolutely facing us in New Mexico on the streets of Albuquerque.
Yeah. All right. Well, another big news story that came out was the drag queen at Atrisco Heritage, an Albuquerque public school here, high school, what resulted in a performance by this drag queen at the school's prom. Um, that has resulted in the suspension, I believe, paid suspension of the principal and three other staff members. So there's been pretty swift repercussions from this incident. And, uh, you know, the thing that keeps coming back to me is that performers are really not, at least in my experience, been a while since I've been to my high school prom, but there were no performers at prom. I mean, aside from the musical artist, uh, the idea of a prom is for you and your friends to celebrate and get together and dance and listen to music and experience, especially for your senior prom, kind of one of those iconic moments that goes down as something you remember from your high school days. The idea of whatever performer, a dance performer at your high school prom is bad enough, let alone a man dressed as a woman and gyrating around with a bunch of high school students. And it's clearly a mistake, I think, on the part of the administration and these officials. Something that hopefully other schools and districts learn from. And I do think it highlights that while New Mexico is a blue state and APS has many issues, we're not quite. If this was someplace in Los Angeles or San Francisco or Portland, it might not be addressed at all. This might just be kind of forgotten about, and life goes on. I do think there is a kernel there still of a kind of social moderation here in New Mexico that still resulted in a lot of concern and outrage.
Yes, and Paul, if I remember the story correctly, this was not a student, for
Nope,
example. This was a
an
an
adult male.
adult that was there, and an adult. Just pick the category of adult dancer you would want at a high school prom,
Yeah,
and then
I don't think a stripper would go over very
no, a
well either.
stripper. Do we want to have what is it, cloggers? It just is a weird thing. Is like, who cannot say no to these things? But maybe this will be a good reminder going forward.
Absolutely, yeah. It's something that should have been addressed or should have never happened for sure. But it's definitely going to be, I think, a case study for future school leaders as to what not to do when it comes to the prom situations there at schools across New Mexico. Lawsuit has been filed by 53 of New Mexico's 89 school districts over the governor's 5-day school mandate. We've talked about it extensively, but it's worth recapping. The governor, before the legislative session, had put forward a regulation through the public education department to mandate 5-day school weeks for every school district in the state. There had been a law passed the previous legislative session, which mandated a certain number of hours of teaching in the classroom, specifically left out any mandates on 5 days of school per week, just simply buttressing the hours in school and in the classroom. Then the governor attempted to have the budget reflect her preference for the 5 days school week. That was overturned via a bipartisan amendment on the House floor and bipartisan agreement in the state Senate that they were going to not use funds in the budget for mandating a 5-day school week. Then the governor line item vetoed that and pushed through her own proposal, regulatorily speaking, through the PED. That has resulted now in a lawsuit from 53 of New Mexico's school districts on that issue. And as we've talked about on this issue in the past, it is a real head scratcher. This is kind of like the marijuana issue in a bit of reverse, in the sense that the governor clearly sees herself as the progenitor and protector of the marijuana industry. For whatever reason, she has also latched on to this 5-day school week issue, regardless of negative impacts on some of these rural communities where kids are riding buses for hours each way to school, and regardless of the results that their schools are achieving, or other issues and popularity with the 4-day school week, where just a few people, in the sense that parents, administrators, teachers, students, all support the 4-day school week and really like it. And yet the governor is really forcing. Oh, and the unions also want the 4-day school week. So it is a bizarre stance taken by the governor. Now it's resulted in litigation for more than half of New Mexico's school districts. So that will be an interesting one to watch. Any thoughts, Wally?
Well, my thoughts are, almost 60% of the school districts by number, and it's noteworthy who didn't sign up for the lawsuit. Santa Fe Public Schools did, absolutely, which it's hard to call anything in Santa Fe, this kind of right-leaning, whatever. It's like it's the city different for a reason. Albuquerque Public Schools did not sign up for this, so I'm not sure why that is. It's possible they're still flush with their COVID money, and this may not impact them as much as some of the other rural districts. But, huge numbers all across the state, and not just not just rural schools. When you have schools like Santa Fe, Alamogordo, some places that are actually towns of a little bit of a size, saying that this is very going to be very difficult for them.
Yeah, it is interesting to see who has signed on and who has not. Uh, Certainly, a concentration in rural New Mexico because those are the districts that have the most reason to go with the 4 day week. A lot of these uh, other districts are not nearly as impacted, and uh, it is worth noting, however, in the Pinion Post, and this is, I believe, a report from the Santa Fe New Mexican, where Santa Fe Public Schools Superintendent Hilario Larry Chavez said that he had really significant concerns, and budgetarily speaking, was not looking forward to having to deal with the 5 day a week mandate. So,
Well, and this is the 180 days thing, so which is the backhanded way to get to the 5.
exactly.
Yeah, that's the issue on that. It's like, let's not keep it clear. It's like, oh, it's not 5 days, it's 180 days. But
Right.
yeah, it's not hours, it's days.
Yeah. So, I think 53 school districts speaks for itself. Whether or not other districts choose to engage is certainly up to them, and based on a number of political calculations. It's certainly um, widely known that Governor Lujan Grisham has a few vindictive bones in her body, and might do something, or might try to come after your district for X, Y, and Z a little more strongly if she doesn't agree with some decisions that you might have made. So there's certainly that. Speaking of mandates at the school district level, we are now going to be pushing back against another mandate. This one is, I think many would say, even more absurd than the 5 day a week mandate. And you can go onto arrowsoфenchantment.com. You can find this regulation, this proposal, links to everything. Uh, the title of the post is MLG's PED proposes wild new regulations on school lunches. That's at arrowsoфenchantment.com, but it's actually at our other sites as well. You can comment on this until May 29th. So the public comment period is available, and I suspect they're going to see quite a bit of pushback. So, long story short, these school lunch mandates, they're two tiers. Level one is kind of the basic. Level two is the people who really are eager and can comply. But I suspect that level two is going to be pretty limited. Level one compliance, I think, is going to be very difficult as well. But here are some of the requirements. Half of all meals shall be freshly prepared at an on-site kitchen at the school. So that right there is challenging, because every school is going to have their own facilities, their own staff on hands. You're not going to have a central meal prep site available for these schools. Food authorities shall offer at least 3 items on a weekly basis from New Mexico farms, ranches, or food businesses. Now, that may be easy enough nowadays with, here we are in April, when certainly some of the early crops are getting out of the ground, and we might be able to serve something up, but might be a little harder in December, January, and February. But, what do we know? Uh, no less than 50% of schools in a school food authority shall grow food on campus. Now, that one is going to be interesting, and that food will be introduced into school lunch programs. So, uh, as we all know, food in New Mexico in the northern hemisphere tends to be grown really at its peak in May, June, July, August months, when attendance at school is spotty. So you're going to have some kind of off-season paid staff having to really till the crops and water them and all that good stuff. So there's that, and God knows, you're gonna have to have high quality soil brought in. You're gonna have to have all these kinds of issues because if you're serving food in the school, it's gonna be a pretty significant space here that you're talking about. And the one that actually I think is overall the most problematic, at least 50% of schools in a school food authority shall have a composting program in place. Now, I grew up around compost piles and gardens, and I think they are a great way to reduce food waste. However, uh, I do not want to be the school official or governor in charge when a compost fire happens and the next big forest fire occurs in the state of New Mexico, because composting works by you take rich nutrient food items and bury them, and it heats up, and the bacteria and whatnot break it down, and that all creates significant amount of heat.
And methane.
And oh, there you go. So what we're ultimately doing here is, again, you're going to need multiple, I think, full-time people to come in and manage these operations. And if you get somebody who's maybe not an expert on some of these areas of food management and making sure all the food's grown on campus and is, healthy and free of, you know, E. coli and crazy stuff like that, you're going to have a huge financial undertaking involving all 89 school districts, not to mention charter schools, et cetera, across the state of New Mexico. This just is an incredibly onerous and a radical set of regulations.
Yes, Paul, and we are 52nd in education rankings, and
That's why I hear.
the other thing is who is 50, why is there 52? We think it's DC and Puerto Rico typically, but 50% shall grow food on their campus. I just want to say that from a food safety point of view, there have been national chains whose name I will not mention had a kind of locally sourced food program, and they had so many foodborne illnesses from that, they were forced to just totally retool their distribution approach. And to me, all of this sounds, oh, isn't that wonderful? But there's a lot more that goes into it. And do we really want our administrators to be focused on growing crops as opposed to educating our children? I think not. And then, Paul, one of the things that gives me hope is this weird or on the growing food. It says, or 50% of the schools in a school food authority shall have cafeterias with print or digital resources promoting locally sourced nutrition education. I don't even know what that means. So are we going to have new nonprofits spring up? Or does that mean that, I don't know, the school can have if you want to buy local during your, promote what's produced, but this just, where did this come from? Is this one of the hazards of legalizing marijuana? Is what in the old days before it was legal, we used to call things like this a marijuana business plan. It's like you would have almost had to be high to come up with something like that and think it was a wonderful idea. So this will be a very interesting one. I want to say that I am certainly not adverse to agricultural education, 4 H, FFA, growing animals and crops for state fairs and the like, much less places like New Mexico State that still have an ag program. But this just seems like it's just, let's say, a tad misguided and going to be a huge distraction, again, from a state that's not doing well in education.
Yeah, it is very problematic. And again, yeah, if I don't know, I'm not big on statewide mandates, but if somebody passed a provision in a budget saying, all school districts need to have a a garden of some kind managed by students as part of a agricultural education. Where does my food come from and how is it, you know, how does it grow kind of process. Okay, that's fine. But this is not even necessarily a student driven thing. There's nothing particularly oriented towards student engagement in the growing and shepherding, if you will, of this food. And we're not assuming that we're talking about real animals, although that would be next level, really, if you had that, because it's at least possible under the law. You got your slaughterhouse set up right there behind the school gymnasium or something. Just absolutely bananas. And yeah, I think uh, if I had to point a finger at this, the state of New Mexico, our politicians they sprained many muscles patting themselves on the back when they made school lunches free for all kids across the state. Of course, they did that on the assumption that they're going to uh, increase access to food from low income and needy kids. Uh, and somehow I think they're trying to now weave this entire food management system and local grow stuff and make that the next level and say, oh, New Mexico's now not just giving away free lunches to all the kids, but they're making sure that it's high quality, locally grown, the kind of things that foodies really get excited about. And I'm not saying that anything's wrong with locally grown food, that there is a problem if people would like to engage in that and buy that, whether for themselves or for their children at school. But this entire array of regulations is entirely, I think, it's going to be way over the top and very near impossible for districts to comply with and actually work through. So we'll see. Again, you can make a public comment through airsofenchantment.com. We've got the email address as well as contact information, or you can use a old-fashioned letter and mail it off to the public education department and share your thoughts on this wild and crazy issue.
Yeah, New Mexico, reading, writing, arithmetic, and locally sourced food to be grown on campus. There you go.
Exactly. All right. New Mexico ranked 31st overall for retirement in a recent Wallet Hub report. That is, I think, somewhat surprising. Maybe New Mexico does tend to rank at the bottom of a lot of lists. We do have some assets in our favor when it comes to retirees. We are a low-cost state, relatively speaking, and actually, affordability is one of the things that we do pretty well on in this Wallet Hub report. We're 20th in affordability, even though we are one of 9 states that charge a tax on Social Security. So um, we do have low property taxes, relatively speaking, and that certainly is important for retirees. Texas, which is 32nd, has zero income tax, which a lot of people do get those pensions and whatnot, but those property taxes will get you in Texas. Although they're only 25th, 45th is where New Mexico comes in the area of quality of life, and I think that's the one that crime and those issues really give us the black eye on a lot of areas. If you're not safe in your property or your person, especially if you're an elderly individual, because you just that more difficulty getting around and being hamstrung by the crime related issues. It's something I think a lot of older people are even less willing to tolerate, and justifiably so, than younger people who are maybe a little more physically robust and willing to tolerate those issues. Healthcare system, we've talked ad nauseum about the doctor shortage. We're actually 35th in the healthcare system, so we're not the worst. Certainly nowhere near the best either. But overall, 31st. Where do you want to be as a retiree? Florida, number one. Colorado, number two. No reason why New Mexico couldn't be at a level of Colorado. Number three, Virginia, Delaware, Wyoming. At the other end of the spectrum, Kentucky, New Jersey, Mississippi, Rhode Island, and Oklahoma, the states that are the least attractive to retirees. So, different factors. Obviously, Social Security tax is an easy way New Mexico could move up, although on the affordability aspect, we're already decent. It's, I think, crime and other quality of life issues where we have the most room to really change our direction.
Yes, and Paul, New Mexico, I'm one of the first to say we have one of the nicest climates anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But climate does not equal quality of life when it comes to these things,
Yeah.
because who does Florida have a nice climate? It does if you like to be hot and sweaty 9 months out of the year. But again,
And you're okay with hurricanes.
yeah, and you're okay with hurricanes and and increasingly high insurance payments to pay for the hurricane damage. But yes, I was surprised we came in 35th on healthcare. That's actually better than I thought we would do. And to your point, I do think New Mexico could easily attract more people if we wouldn't tax Social Security. That's one of those. It's interesting. People don't always look at total affordability. They look at some pieces and parts and aren't really sure about them. And there's no reason we need to tax Social Security, but for some reason, we certainly have a hard time turning away from that in Santa Fe. Anytime any legislation comes up, it's always like, well, we'll do it for some people, but not for all. So not a big surprise, but again, that 45th in quality of life, that is the biggie. And I would think that at some point, quality of life and education, you probably need to tie those together, because today's dropouts become tomorrow's criminals largely, and we really need to work hard on both of those to become a better place where people want to live, plain and simple.
Exactly. So, yeah, we got a lot of simple issues that just haven't been willing to tackle as a state, and that, as is always the case, impacts who you vote for at the ballot box. I know that is a broken record statement on my part, but it really does matter. And yeah, I'm not saying that solving crime 100% is realistic or easy, but there is absolutely no question, especially in New Mexico's biggest cities, that we could do a much, much better job of addressing our crime issues. All right. So, Wally, Ford just reported, according to CNN, a massive loss on every electric vehicle sold. Yes, this is the EV portion of our program here. Sponsored in reverse by Ford's electric vehicle unit, which reported a loss of 1.3 billion with a B dollars in the first quarter of 2024, losing a cool $132,000 for each of the 10,000 vehicles sold in the first 3 months of the year. Again, according to CNN, that notorious right-wing website. That is a huge loss. I would love to, maybe I could come up with a deal with Ford. They can sponsor our podcast and I can agree not to buy an electric vehicle. I would save them $132,000 and we could just, they could give us the $2,000 per show and I'd be perfectly happy with that.
Yeah, we'll just take it over time, and otherwise we're going to go buy several of your vehicles.
Yeah.
And that 135,000 probably is this huge development cost with almost very limited units going out the door. And so we have,
Absolutely.
and so, but
We do
the offer,
understand the way
we
marginal
understand.
cost works.
But having said that, I would agree to take one of their electric vehicles for free, and I would never talk about it again. So, but this whole electric vehicle thing, we're saying that yeah, there's some progress that's being made, but there's a long way to go from here, and there are companies that took a little bit different approach, notably Toyota, that says this EV thing is crazy. How you're doing it, it's going to crash. And so we're going to be focusing on hybrids. And it turned out that they are in a lot better position than a lot of other car companies because they took that approach. And, hybrids are a good solution. It is very interesting when it comes to this carbon reduction is by trying for quote unquote zero carbon solutions on day one. They basically, put industry after industry in a position to where they have to try to do that. And then when they can't, it turns out they've wasted tons of time and money on things that could actually have reduced carbon emissions, and this is just one of those. So electric vehicles, they are not doing real well. Tesla is not doing well. There's huge infrastructure problems, and then we have a lot of problems with charging stations and capacity. And this problem will eventually happen to be solved, but I just don't think it's going to be the by 2030 sort of thing that a lot of people are thinking it's going to be.
Yeah, and one additional item from that story is Ford's Model E sold 10,000 vehicles in the quarter. That was down 20% from the number it sold a year earlier. I believe that is the Mach E, the Mustang E looking thing. That's another indicator that the EV marketplace seems to be getting saturated, and all the low hanging fruit, the people who were amenable to buying electric vehicles have already purchased their electric vehicles, and the people who are not interested are not buying those vehicles. And so it's going to get progressively more difficult and more expensive for both the car dealers as well as the Biden administration and the Lujan Grisham administration to foist those EVs on an unwilling population. But got another story here about EVs, and of the groups and people, businesses that make sense for EVs, FedEx and UPS really are, again, low hanging fruit here because you see them driving their delivery vehicles throughout your neighborhood and hand delivering your wife's Amazon packages, which happens on a day-to-day occurrence around the Guessing household. Sorry, that's just a actual fact. But the electric vehicle kind of makes sense because you can just start it and stop it, and it's really quite simple. But according to a Reuters report that was at Yahoo Finance, UPS and FedEx are not super excited about the way EVs are working out for them. It says they are hampered by battery shortages that are limiting EV supplies and keeping prices high. Startup electric van makers are running out of money and shutting down. And UPS's VP for fleet maintenance and engineering told Reuters, the question is how many of these companies will be here in 5 years, 10 years? This is the kind of thing that hit the buses of the city of Albuquerque. A lot of technological issues, companies going bankrupt. We've got buses currently running in the city of Albuquerque that are there from a company that's bankrupt and dealing with supply chain issues. And so, even for a company where the model is you charge them overnight and then the delivery drivers take those vehicles, start them and stop them a whole bunch of times as they're making the deliveries throughout a day, and then they come back and can stick them back on the charger. That is not necessarily going particularly well. If it's not going well for them, it's not going to go really well for the entire industry or the technology.
Yeah, and the Paul, the issue about the manufacturers going bankrupt. You know, if you look over the history of bus manufacturing in Roswell, Mexico, there's been a bus manufacturer come and go there many, many times over the years. And these sort of specialty vehicle manufacturers, even before the electric vehicle issue was thrown in there, have a hard time being sustainable and not going out of business when there's an economic downturn, a disruption in some part of their business model. They're very sensitive. And then you have to be in the right place at the right time, and you need your electric feeder system to be able to charge these overnight. And that is always not an easy thing to do. And then, when you have they have to be able to go the number of miles that are necessary. And to do that right now, that means big old batteries and lots of them, which can create other issues as we're seeing with regard to how heavy they are and, just how heavy the batteries are that are needed to just make these trucks go, much less haul freight. So, yeah, is it mean that these are horrible and never going to work? No, but it also again just theme comes time and time again is the cost to make these changes very quickly without just innovation from the marketplace, meaning from on high, thou shalt do this is it's going to be very problematic and continue to be so. And guess what we have in Albuquerque? We have hills too, and electric vehicles use more energy when they have to go up and down. So I don't know. Let's let the post office do the electric vehicles. They'll show us how it's done. So,
Yeah, sure. Last item. Information came out this week about the birth rate nationwide. It's fallen after a couple years of increasing, and I think birth rate is there's a lot of people looking at it right now because our rates in the United States have fallen well below replacement levels. We're at 1.62 replacements, about half a kid higher than that. So everybody go out, have half a kid, and get up to 2.1. But I digress. It's just a mathematical enterprise here. No state in the nation, according to a report that we found, um, has even a 2.0 birth rate. South Dakota at 1.99, highest in the nation. This is a very blue state, red state phenomenon where the lowest tend to be in the northeast part of the country. Vermont, 1.27, very much on the lower scale, I believe the very bottom. Uh, Oregon, 1.34. So, politically speaking, a lot of the bluer states being less willing to have children. New Mexico, a blue state, but I think both culturally and with our relatively low income levels, a little bit more common to have children here than in a lot of the bluer states, 1.54. So below the national average, but a lot of the most blue states, I mean, California, 1.47, 1.46 in Washington State, 1.51 in Illinois. So you got the Midwest, but you got the liberal side of things. So it's interesting data. It has this will and is going to have profound implications economically for the nation as a whole, but also the states that are having fewer kids. Obviously, when it comes to states, you can have relatively easy immigration from other states, perhaps for job-related issues, higher income opportunities, et cetera. So it doesn't have the same implications quite as the national rate as a whole. But as a whole, keeping Social Security propped up and the whole welfare state, all of those things are going to be heavily dependent on uh, or impacted by the reduction of number of children people are having, and that's something that's going to impact our economy and our nation for years to come. So I saw this information at the state level, and I thought it was fascinating, and it's worth checking out. at heirsofenchantment.com.
Yeah, demographics are very important to the future of a country and of an economy. I think the good news is the United States is better off than many other countries.
Best looking horse in the glue factory.
Exactly. But we do have our challenges as well. And yeah, the other thing is that there are 50 states, and New Mexico, I'd like to see a little more state numbers come out as time goes on, because I do believe the last numbers I'd seen, New Mexico's faring worse than many states, probably not the worst, but there's a lot of factors that go into this, and this is almost like this almost is also related to New Mexico's population issues. So if we're not having very many children, and the ones we have are leaving, that is not necessarily a recipe for a thriving economic situation over the long term.
All right. Well, we are going to let it stay there. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.